Now in our 26th year of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are this week in Amateur Radio, the premier all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition number 1357 with a release and air date of Saturday, March 1st, 2025. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone.
On the amateur radio bands around the world and streaming on the internet since 1993, we are this week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1357 of This Week in Amateur Radio. The Radio Society of Great Britain announces the 2025 ban plans. We will have the details. The Australian regulator, ACMA, finalises its licensing fees, while New Zealand is looking for comments on its proposal. Hap Holly, KC9RP, moderator of Amateur Radio's The Rain Report, becomes a silent key. Colorado high school students visit the Plishner Radio Astronomy Science Center and get exposed to ham radio. The Voice of America Museum announces its grand reopening after a 7-month renovation project. The FCC warns broadcasters about artist Payola. New satellite solar sails aim to enhance space weather alerts. Registration begins in mid-March for the 24th USA National Radio Orienteering Championships. Radio astronomers in Australia battle RF interference. We will have the details, the source will surprise you. The Dayton Hamvention announces the theme for the 2025 show. United Kingdom regulator Ofcom eyes spectrum sharing on the 6 GHz band. And scientists have made significant strides in making solar panels more affordable. We will tell you how they're doing it in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Onno Benschop, Phi K6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio, presents part 10 of his open-source project The Bald Yak. This week he answers the question, how does it all fit together? Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another new edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will takes us aboard the Wayback Machine to a time when vacuum tubes were making CW practical. They were also making voice transmissions possible. Experimental broadcasts using radio telephone began as experiments by amateurs and some of the wireless telegraph companies, including Marconi and DeForest. We will stop by and visit with Bill Saliers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and a lot more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio just outside Albany, New York, this is W2XBS.
Reporting from our bureau in Dallas, where it feels like spring already, I'm Tammy, KI5ODE.
Reporting from our news bureau in Salem, Ohio, this is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
And reporting from our news bureau in downtown Syracuse, New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
Reporting from our news bureau in Lebanon, Tennessee, where it has been gloriously above 60 degrees all week, I'm Al Shepard, WK8W.
And reporting from our news bureau in Knoxville, Tennessee, where we are getting the first little taste of spring, I'm Josh Marler, AA4WX.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, I'm Eric, KD2RJX.
And reporting live from our news bureau in Western Mass, where we're all desperately clinging to the hope that the spring will actually show up in the next 27 days. Because let's be honest, winter's been hanging around way too long. I'm Marvin Turner, W0MET.
And reporting from our amateur radio outpost atop the Catskill Mountains in western New York State, where green grass is beginning to poke up through the slush and the snow and the ice, I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where we're going from the deep freeze to spring? Wow! I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, waiting for the other shoe to drop.
With our lead story this week, I'm Tammy, KI5ODE. The Radio Society of Great Britain has released its band plans for 2025. The 2025 band plans can be found in the March edition of RADCOM. These incorporate further VHF and UHF changes in response to the increased demand that has been prompted by the new Ofcom amateur license and few from the 2023 International Amateur Radio Union Region 1 General Conference. The band plans are also available on the RSGB website in various formats, where more detailed change notes can also be found to guide users. In summary, the changes for 2025 are HF, no change at present. However, we continue to liaise at IARU level regarding proposals for harmonization and a rebalance between CW and SSB versus digital usage. VHF, 3 additional 145 MHz FM gateway frequencies have been included. UHF, the 432 MHz narrowband sections have been simplified to a unified 2.7 kHz max bandwidth for all modes in line with IARU Region 1 changes. A raft of detailed changes cover gateway and repeater additions and band plan notes. These include a new class of 5 MHz split 70 cm repeaters and a pair of 9 MHz splits for emergency communications and community usage. Clearer provisions for other applications such as pagers and LoRa are included. Microwave, no change at present, but we have submitted options to the forthcoming IARU interim meeting in April regarding potential changes to the 23 cm band. A new license includes obligations to coordinate and to carry out an interference assessment. However, with the increasing numbers of repeaters and gateways, it is inevitable that coverage areas and some levels of low-level mutual interference will have to be accepted, as there is now minimal capacity left in 145 and 430 MHz. However, we would welcome greater use and innovation in the 50 and 70 MHz bands. As band plans do change over time, please ensure you only refer or link to the current ones on the RSGB website and remove any older ones you have locally. Unfortunately, we still note some websites and unofficial usage charts have obsolete information and urge that these are all removed. The latest band plan information, including the master Excel files, can be found on the operating section of the RSGB website. Please do not host copies on other websites, and if you are unsure, by all means contact the relevant spectrum managers.
Faced with the oncoming sunset of methods used to calculate fees for repeaters, beacons, and some apparatus amateur licenses, the Australian Communications and Media Authority has finalized small changes it is making. These changes, based on a new methodology, will take effect after the April 1st sunset of the previous method. The result is that repeaters, beacons, and non-assigned apparatus licenses will be assessed $52.62 annually. The changes do not affect those holding Australian class licenses, which have no annual fees. The ACMA said in its February 5th announcement that it has not yet finalized its apparatus license tax reforms for radio navigation satellite service repeaters. Meanwhile, New Zealand's Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment is seeking feedback on changes to its proposed radio spectrum license fees. These fees recover the costs of managing New Zealand's radio spectrum regulatory system, including maintaining the register of radio frequencies, issuing licenses, and investigating interference, and for the past 8 years, fees have been set below actual costs due to an historic surplus. As the surplus is nearly depleted, the regulator is adjusting fees to ensure full cost recovery. The proposed changes shift fees from an under-recovering level to full recovery. Under consideration are 2 fee options, needed from the New Zealand spectrum users, their preferred opinion, and how the changes may impact businesses. The consultation is open until 5 p.m. on April 11th, 2025.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
This story is one that affects us here at This Week in Amateur Radio. This week we lost a colleague in the amateur radio news community, and for us a personal friend. Alanson Hap Holly, KC9RP, retired founder and moderator of the weekly amateur radio feature magazine, the Radio Amateur Information Network, better known by its acronym, the RAIN Report, is now a silent key. Holly passed away February 24th, 2025. He'd been blind since he was 7 years old, but he hosted his amateur radio program by touch and by ear in his home studio and ham shack in suburban Chicago, Illinois. Holly, who was born in La Jolla, California, earned his novice license in 1965 at the age of 14, his general license in 1966, and his advanced class license in 1981. He graduated from Principia College in Elijah, Illinois in 1974, earning a Bachelor of Arts degree in sociology. Hap and Stephanie were also active members of the Des Plaines Emergency Management Agency. He was employed for many years as an audio engineer and monitor for Horizons for the Blind. According to a column written by an amateur radio operator several years ago, Holly woke up one morning when he was 7 years old, only to discover that he had no sight. Both of his parents were also blind, but none of his siblings were. Friends said that he considered blindness not a disability, but rather only a challenge that fine-tuned his other senses. A feature movie about Hap and the challenges his parents faced was made and first aired in 1996 on CBS. Its name was What Love Sees, starring Richard Thomas. Holly was active on HF, VHF, and the Internet using a personal computer equipped with the JAWS speech screen reading software. He was named in the 2002 Hamvention Amateur of the Year and was a member of the 220 MHz Guys Amateur Radio Club. Holly is survived by his wife, Stephanie, KA9WKD. A memorial visitation for Holly will be held Saturday, May 3rd from 10 a.m. till noon at G.L. Hill's Funeral Home, 745 Graceland Avenue, Des Plaines, Illinois.
On January 21st, voting was completed on proposal number 266 concerning the admission of the Libyan Communications Amateur Society to International Amateur Radio Union membership. With 52 affirmative votes required for approval, there were 61 votes in favor, no votes in opposition, and no abstentions. Accordingly, Proposal 266 has been adopted. Meanwhile, the first IARU Region 1 Monitoring System newsletter of 2025 has been published. The January edition highlights that almost 1,000 transmissions of powerful over-the-horizon radar signals were recorded in the HF amateur bands for January alone. Transmissions associated with the Russian-Ukrainian radio war continue to dominate reports as well.
In late January 2025, 17 students and staff members from the Los Animas High School in Colorado visited the Deep Space Exploration Society radio telescope located at the Plishner Radio Astronomy and Space Sciences Center near Haskell, Colorado. They got an introduction to amateur radio. Here to tell us more from League headquarters is John Ross, KD8IDJ.
This first field trip of high school students reflected the dreams of Michael Lowe, former DSES board member, who sought to create a Center for Radio Astronomy and Space Science Education in southeast Colorado, said DSES President Myron Babcock, KL7YY. Since 2009, society members have devoted hundreds of hours to rebuilding the Filsner site. In 2024, a grant from the Amateur Radio Digital Communications Group provided funds to complete a new building suitable for hosting groups. Student braved intense winds and cold to venture into the underground bunker location of the DSES amateur radio station, K0PRT. Board member Paul Sobin, NO0T, demonstrated how long-distance contacts are made using high-frequency HF transceivers. Under his supervision, several students learned to call CQ. Unfortunately, because band conditions were poor, no student got a response. But later, Sobin was able to contact a radio amateur in the Canary Islands, and students observed two-way HF radio communications between those two stations some 5,000 miles apart. About half the students who visited the site will participate in this year's Colorado Science Olympiad competition. The Deep Space Exploration Society is an all-volunteer group united by love for science, exploration, and learning about space. Its members include engineers, software, radio, electrical, professors, pilots, business owners, military veterans, construction workers, truck drivers, and amateur radio operators. DSES welcomes new members. Student membership is free. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Deep Space Exploration Society radio board member Ray Ubekran, AA0L, and DSES member Roger Oakley, W3MIX, showed students how the big dish was controlled to track and focus on deep space objects as Earth revolves. DSES Vice President Bill Miller, KC0FHN, gave an overview of the organization's history and the years of effort required to revive the 60-foot diameter radio telescope. He introduced radio astronomy and some of the studies DSES members have conducted since restoring their telescope, including detecting pulsars and massers, observing solar and planetary radio emissions, and mapping the hydrogen line to show which galaxies are moving toward or away from Earth. About half the students who visited the site will participate in this year's Colorado Science Olympiad competition. Jennifer Poynton, Science Olympiad coach and LAHS counselor, said she wanted the students to see the Plishner facilities and learn how DSES can provide opportunities for research and mentorship in astronomy, radio, electronics, and engineering.
It is time for this month's Volunteer Monitoring Program report. The Volunteer Monitor Program is a joint initiative between ARRL and the FCC to enhance compliance in the amateur radio service. Here is this month's activity report of the VM program. A commendation was issued to an amateur in Simpsonville, South Carolina, for exceptional operating skills and courtesy on 7.210 MHz in October 2024. A commendation was issued to an operator in Etna, Wyoming, for exceptional net control operation and courtesy in the Wyoming Cowboy Net meeting on 3.923 MHz in September 2024. Technician class operators in Mississippi, Maine, and Florida received advisories for FT8 operation on 20 meters. Technicians have no operating privileges on 20 meters. Operators in Louisiana and Arizona received advisories for operation with expired licenses. A technician class operator in Texas received an advisory for FT8 operation on 17 meters. Technicians have no operating privileges on 17 meters. A technician class operator in Florida received an advisory concerning FT8 operation on 15 meters. Technicians have only CW privileges on 15 meters. An operator in Ohio received an advisory for extended transmissions on 40 meters with no FCC required identification. An operator in Virginia received an advisory for deliberate interference and harassment on 3.933 MHz in October 2024 and was advised of the FCC forfeiture amounts for such operation. The operator was also advised that such operation would be an issue in any license renewal proceeding. There were 2 case referrals from the FCC to the Volunteer Monitor Program, and there was 1 FCC meeting regarding interference. The total monitoring time for this report were 1,527 hours on HF frequencies and 1,835 hours on VHF frequencies and above, for a total of 3,362 hours. We thank Volunteer Monitor Program Administrator, Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH, for this report.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
We have for you a terrific story about how high school and a science fiction movie sparked interest in amateur radio. John Ross, KD8 IDJ, is here with the story.
Steve Snickel was a young high school student in the late 80s and was introduced to amateur radio through his electronics classes. He also spent time working at a local radio shack and watching science fiction movies at a nearby theater in his hometown of Pensacola, Florida. Amateur radio's next biggest influence on Steve came in 1997 on opening night of the movie Contact, about a scientist who finds evidence of extraterrestrial life and is chosen to make first contact. I remember the entire theater erupted when, in the opening scene, amateur radio operator K4WLD responded to a call from W9GFO and stated his location was Pensacola, said Schnickel. It sounded like the home team had scored in overtime to win the game. It was very loud. Fast forward to November 24th, 2024. Schnickel passed the exam for his technician license, as was assigned KQ4YXP on November 11th. Then he passed his general license and on November 29th changed his call sign to KQ4ZDR and then again to KZ4OW. After a month of study, he passed his extra class license exam, but there was still something missing from his newfound amateur radio hobby. To celebrate, I started researching vanity call signs in order to try and reward myself with a 1x2 call sign. I researched everything that had become available, and just as I was about to file the application with the FCC with a list of about a dozen 1x2 calls, I then paused and wondered if anybody actually had the call sign WK4WLD from the movie. It turned out K4WLD had just fallen out of a 2-year grace period hold a couple of weeks prior and was now available. Schnickel submitted his vanity application and on January 11th, 2025, was assigned the new call sign K4WLD. I can proudly say the K4WLD was awarded to me in January of 2025, and I still live in Pensacola, Florida. Now that is life imitating art, Schnickel concluded. And K4WLD has come home to Pensacola in real life, just like in the movie. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
All well and good except for one small detail. Most of his equipment has been on back order for several months. He is also a proud new ARRL member.
The Dayton Hamvention is May 16th through the 18th of this year. Chairman Brian Markland, N8UDQ, unveiled the convention theme, which is Radio Independence. He announced that her theme this year will be highlighting freedom, resilience, and endless possibilities within amateur radio. As our world grows more connected through POTA, SOTA, YouTube, and international communications, radio is breaking through the traditional boundaries like never before. Historically, radio has been regulated and even banned in some places, but today we have the freedom to explore, communicate, and innovate without limits. At Hamvention, we're proud to champion this radio independence. Meanwhile, it's been announced that Aries Boot Camp will be held at California's Big Bear Ham Escape. Plan to attend the Big Bear Ham Escape on April 25 through April 27 in the Big Bear Lake community of California. The ARRL Orange Section Convention is also sponsored by the Big Bear Visit Big Bear and Amateur Radio Digital Communications, a California-based foundation with roots in amateur radio and the technology of Internet communications. An estimated 700 participants are expected to visit Big Bear Lake for the weekend. Approximately 30 seminars and workshops will be held. A full-day introductory Aries boot camp and a full day of POTA and SOTA training will also be held on Friday.
After a 7-month closure, the Voice of America Museum of Broadcasting has reopened with more interactive displays and a more comfortable environment that's less crowded and cluttered. We concentrated heavily on infrastructure, said Jack Dominic, the museum's executive director. The museum used a $500,000 state capital grant and stretched it with volunteer or low-cost labor. Visitors will see fewer walls, better lighting at displays, carpeting throughout, and a new HVAC system providing air conditioning to the building for the first time in its history. We pulled out miles of electrical cable made out of cloth and steel. We put in all new wiring and LED lighting throughout the building. We have a ventilation system and no more humidity, Dominic said. To make it easier for wheelchair-bound patrons, ramps were added, steps were removed, a new paved parking lot was added, and bathrooms modified to meet requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act. While those structural changes were being made, board member, curator, and docent Leland Lee Haight was focusing on the exhibits themselves. The museum complex provided communications worldwide during the World War II era through 1994, when the station stopped broadcasting after it was decommissioned. The Tylersville Road station had 6 200,000-watt transmitters and 24 high-directional antennas at its peak, used to send broadcasts to Africa, Europe, and South America. The museum showcases that history and includes collections and exhibits from the VOA Bethany Station, Media Heritage's Greater Cincinnati Museum of Broadcast History, the Gray History of Wireless Museum, and the Westchester Amateur Radio Association's control room. I have first-hand knowledge of how people react to exhibits, signage, and videos, Haight said. We try to make exhibits easy, simple, but still informative. Noting that people like to play with things, Haight made improvements to the listening stations for original, vintage WLW, and VOA broadcasts. We needed to make them more inviting, he said. To do that, the larger touchscreens were added throughout the museum, so people no longer had to use a mouse to navigate to the broadcasts they were interested in. Several really comfortable chairs were added. Lighting changes were added at other exhibits by putting in drop ceilings and focusing the lights just on the exhibit instead of the entire room. A museum has a message. It might not be obvious if we don't do the exhibit right. I'm an engineer, but I'm not creating an exhibit for engineers, Haight said. I want it to work for my wife, who is not an engineer. I want people to understand the exhibit. Added to the museum is a sound effects Foley room. Visitors can use 50 different sound effect devices to hear wind, rain, surf, and gunshot. Original news broadcasts made and transmitted by the VOA from the 1940s through 1990s are also accessible. Among them are the Kennedy assassination and the first man to walk on the moon. These are all things meant for you to come in and play with, Dominic said. There is an area focusing on the broadcast history of Cincinnati and Dayton. For example, Cincinnati was one of the first cities to use radios for police cars. The display features call boxes placed on streets. Visit the Modern Radio Lab to learn how Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and cellular work. Walk the Coast Guard Courier Hallway to learn about the world's largest radio broadcasting ship. Check the VOA Museum's webpage for days and hours you can visit.
Alan Boyd, VE3AJB, Radio Amateurs of Canada President and Chairman, has announced the selection of Mike Kelly, VE3FFK, as the recipient of the RAC Amateur of the Year Award for 2024. With over 5 decades as an amateur, Mike, VE3FFK, has volunteered countless hours as a member of the Ottawa Amateur Radio Club. My amateur career began as a teenager, intrigued by the sounds of Morse on an old all-wave radio and wanting to figure out what the guys were saying. That led to a course with the Ottawa Amateur Radio Club and eventually a few executive positions there over the years. One of those positions was the club's designated delegated examiner in around 1993, something I still enjoy doing, Mike said. An interest in public service events led to several years volunteering for the Canadian Ski Marathon, the Rideau Lakes Bicycle Tour, several car rallies, soccer tournaments, and road running events. Other interests including bicycle mobile HF and VHF operating and portable operation before it became as popular as it is today. Radio Amateurs of Canada sincerely congratulates Mike Kelly, VE3FFK, on his appointment as Amateur of the Year for 2024.
Ham Radio Gizmos proudly announced the launch of its groundbreaking documentary platform designed to educate and inspire the ham radio community. This innovative series melds rich historical narratives with modern technological insights, offering viewers an in-depth look at the evolution of the amateur radio hobby. Led by industry veteran Lee Love, callsign N2LEE, whose diverse background spans decades in marketing and extensive television production, as well as 15 years as a commercial advertising photographer and director in Washington, D.C. Ham Radio Gizmos is set to transform how enthusiasts engage with ham radio's history and innovation. Our documentary series is a journey through time, showcasing the untold stories of ham radio's past, while highlighting the breakthroughs that continue to shape its future, said Lee Love, founder and chief storyteller at Ham Radio Gizmos. By connecting historical insights with today's cutting-edge technology, we aim to empower both new and seasoned hams with knowledge and inspiration. Key highlights of the documentary series are historical exploration. Delve into little-known narratives that reveal the origins and evolution of ham radio. Modern innovation, understanding how early breakthroughs have paved the way for today's technological advancements. Expert storytelling, benefit from Lee Love's unparalleled expertise, blending decades of industry experience with a passion for ham radio. Engaging multimedia content, experience documentaries enriched with archival footage, expert interviews, and in-depth analysis. Ham Radio Gizmos is dedicated to providing a comprehensive resource that not only educates but also celebrates the legacy and future of ham radio. Through this documentary series, The platform promises to be an indispensable guide for enthusiasts eager to explore the technical and historical dimensions of the hobby. Ham Radio Gizmos is an innovative digital platform committed to exploring the rich legacy and evolving future of ham radio. Through engaging documentaries and expert content, the platform seeks to educate, inspire, and empower the ham radio community by bridging historical milestones with modern technological advancements.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. This section of DX News comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. The VK9XU Christmas Island DXpedition is underway with caveats. As of February 21st, the VK9XU German-Austrian DXpedition group is on the air, but only on 2 bands and only on digital modes. A bag containing antenna mast poles did go astray. However, as of this morning, the missing ski bag with antenna poles arrived at Christmas Island. They began preparing the low-band antenna but couldn't finish in the dark. It should be ready for use by now. KB8NW 10 Mergliota of the Ohio Penn DX Bulletin reports that IV3FSG Elvira is now QRV as D68 Zulu from Moroni Comoros Islands until March 18th. Activity will be on various HF bands using CW sideband and FT4, FT8. Logs will be uploaded to ClubLog, QSL via IK2, DUW, or Logbook of the World. More details will follow. G4BUO Dave will be in 5 Whiskey, Samoa, until March 4th using the call sign 5 Whiskey 0 Uniform Oscar. Activity will be holiday style and mainly CW. So by the time you're listening to this, you're only going to have a couple days to try to find Dave and confirm Samoa. The DX India Foundation is mounting a trip to Anola, which is IOTA AS169, May 29th to June 1st. They hope to obtain the call sign AU2M. According to Sarath, VU2RS, Arnola is the most wanted IOTA entity in India. The DX India website has a news release with full details, including operators, QSL information, and donors and sponsorships. The Rebel DX Group DXpedition to Nigeria, 5 November 9 DTG, reports high noise levels in excess of 20 dB on 160 meters, making communication impossible. They hope that the noise will decrease. They also learned that the country's telecommunications authority had denied them permission to operate on 60 meters. We have an update on the V73 Whiskey DXpedition to the Marshall Islands. The DXpedition has officially surpassed 100,000 QSOs, marking an incredible milestone in their journey. A huge thank you to all the hams who have made this achievement possible, they said. Your enthusiasm has fueled some tremendous pileups over the past days. As we near the final stretch, the team has started disassembling antennas and infrastructure with logistical operations well underway. However, some high-band antennas are still active, keeping us on the air for those final QSOs before we wrap up. We also had to bid farewell to Jamie, M0SDV, who has now left for home. A huge thank to our supporters and every operator who has worked us. Your contributions and QSO efforts have made this expedition a success, so thank you. Here's more information on the newest IARU member society. Last week I reported that the International Amateur Radio Union, Region 1, had welcomed the Libyan Communication Amateur Society, LCAS, of Tripoli, Libya, into the IARU community, making them an IARU member, bringing its total membership in. This decision was made unanimously. LCAS was founded on May 12th of 2024, and it has 7 licensed amateurs members. Its officers are 5 Alpha 21MB chairman, 5 Alpha 21 Zulu X-Ray Deputy Chairman, and 5 Alpha 21 Alpha Fox President of the General Assembly. So we welcome them to the IARU member community. The Board of Directors of the YASME Foundation is pleased to announce the following grants. A supporting grant of $7,500 to the World Radio Sport Team Championship United Kingdom 2026 Organizing Committee for general expenses, and a second grant of $3,000 to fund the Ham Widows Ball for spouses in attendance. The board encourages other organizations and individuals to support this global event. Further information about WRTC 2026 can be found at wrtc2026.org. I would encourage you to check that out. The WRTC is just a terrific event, and it happens every couple years, so give that a look. A grant covering the expenses of Hamvention 2025 space rental for HAMSI and YOTA/HR2. A grant to the Ethiopian Amateur Radio Association for a club construction project of QRP Labs QMX Plus 160 through 6 meter 5-watt multi-mode transceiver kits. A grant of $7,500 in support of YOTA 2025 Summer Camp in Denver, which is June 15th to the 20th. The board encourages other organizations and individuals to support this growing event for youth in North America and amateur radio. Further information can be found at youthontheair.org/Denver. And a supporting grant to Contest University at Hamvention 2025 in Xenia. And this was sent out by Ward Silver, N0AX, president of the YASME Foundation. Now, I mentioned the VU4 group going to the islands there earlier, and here's a follow-up on a different program. From the VU7 Student Project Program, we have the following to share. Quote, "Dear student amateur radio operators around the world, we are thrilled to invite you to join the VU7 Project DXpedition as student participants. This is a unique opportunity for you to learn from experienced and eminent amateur radio operators, gain hands-on experience, and be part of a thrilling adventure." Well, here's a little about the VU7 project. The VU7 project is a DXpedition aimed at activating the Lakshadweep Islands, a remote and rare entity located in the Arabian Sea. Our team of experienced operators will set up stations, antennas, and equipment to make contacts with the global amateur radio community. As student participants, you will be immersed in all aspects of the DXpedition, including setting up antennas and equipment, learning about radio propagation, antennas, and transmission techniques, making contacts with amateur radio operators worldwide, understanding the logistics and planning involved in a DXpedition, interacting with experienced operators and learning from their experience. By participating in the VU7 project, you will gain hands-on experience in amateur radio operation, develop skills in teamwork, communication, and problem solving, learn from experienced operators and industry experts, be part of a unique and exciting adventure, and receive a certificate of participation and a special QSL card. This DXpedition will take place from the 16th of January 2026 to the 31st of January 2026. You will be required to join the team for the entire duration. We will provide accommodation and food during the DXpedition. You will need to bring your own personal gear, including clothing, toiletries, and any necessary medications. To confirm your participation, please reply to the email by the 1st of May 2025. We will provide you with any further details, including the itinerary, equipment list, and other necessary information. We look forward to having you on board. With best regards, Sarath, VU2RS, the VU7 project team leader. And you can contact Sarath at sara@vu2rs.com, or you can always send me a question and I'll forward it on to thedxmentor@gmail.com. Well, I know that the ARL contest sheet is read elsewhere in this podcast, and the contests that I mention are sometimes redundant. However, there are a few contests that I have found to be especially useful for DXers who are trying to fill band slots or to get entities or zones in the log that may otherwise be difficult to get. So here's some contest and DX information. The CQ Amateur Radio Hall of Fame was established in January of 2001 to recognize those individuals, whether licensed radio amateurs or not, who significantly affected the course of amateur radio, and radio amateurs who, in the course of their professional lives, had a significant impact on their professions or on world affairs. The CQ Amateur Radio Hall of Fame was created and controlled by Richard Ross, K2MGA, who now is a Silent Key, and Rich Moseson, W2VU of CQ Magazine fame. CQ Magazine has discontinued, but the Heritage CQ Amateur Radio Hall of Fame will continue to honor select qualified individuals. Ham Gallery will be the new steward of this award with blessings from Kathy Ross, who is the wife of K2MGA. It will be controlled and reviewed by a select and diverse group of amateurs. Nominations will be accepted from January 1st through April 15th of each year. You can send your nominations to Tom Roscoe, K8CX. Make sure to put, quote, CQ Amateur Radio Hall of Fame in the subject line. You will be notified by April 30th if your nomination was accepted or declined. The Contest Hall of Fame and the CQDX Hall of Fame is also taking nominations until March 1st. So if you need information on any of this or you need some of it repeated, again, send me an email at thedxmentor@gmail.com. On March 9th, from 0 Zulu to 0359 Zulu, which is 4 hours, the North American RTTY Sprint will be held. I am personally going to give this one a try this year. The challenge is that, unlike other contests where you can park on a frequency and just run stations, you must make one QSO and then move to another frequency. It takes some coordination and focus, but it is fun, at least on the CW side of things. I will give this RTTY one a try. You can get details by checking the WA7BNM.com website. If you are interested in RTTY but not looking for a contest, you might try the weekly RTTY test held every Thursday between 0145 Zulu and 0215 Zulu, which is 30 minutes. Check out radiosport.world/wrt.html for details, or as always, you can contact me. This weekly contest has gotten me back into RTTY, and I really look forward to it every week. Until next week, this is Bill, AJB saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pile-ups.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Here's an update on a story we brought you last week. The electronics firm Rig Expert's administrative office in Kiev, Ukraine, has been destroyed by a Russian ballistic missile. All employees are reported to be safe. Rig Expert is a leading manufacturer of antenna and cable analyzers, and officials said they're committed to restoring operations as soon as possible. Our top priority is the safety of our team and the continuity of their operations, said Aishat Andiv, Chief Executive Officer. While our administrative office is in ruins, our production facilities, however, have survived, allowing us to continue serving our customers. The news this week has been consistently bad, but Ukrainians frequently carry on as if nothing's changed. This is because of the way little does change, and if you're dealing in daily life and not headlines, the reality is the fight in whatever form it takes. For example, the Zaporizhzhia Radio Club lost its windows due to one of the nightly drone attacks, and it'll get down to fixing them now. A mobile air defense group has been chasing drones, and it's just happened to be shot down over the workshop. That's not news, said Miak, the chairman. Just another day for Ukrainian volunteer workshop, with a few extra tasks rebuilding the place after the military attack. As the name suggests, the club, which has a few dozen members, was founded for ham radio enthusiasts in Zaporizhzhia City and Oblast. They teach young people to design and assemble various electronic devices, broadcast, and communicate digitally and in Morse code.
Welcome to the 28th segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio. Hams, organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our thanks to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website in the production of these segments. Now sit back and relax and enjoy the next chapter of ham radio history. Radio telephone. As vacuum tubes were making CW practical, they were also making voice transmissions possible. Experimental broadcasts using radio telephone, or just phone to hams, began as experiments by amateurs and some of the wireless telegraph companies, including Marconi and DeForest. In these early years of radio, just having a receiver to listen to the limited number of phone broadcasts was sufficient to be regarded as a radio amateur. The Marconi wireless telephone was demonstrated publicly for the first time on 12 June 1916. Aboard a ship making its way out of Long Island Sound en route to Boston, an audience heard conversation and music via a 2-hour broadcast from Marconi's station in Aldine, New Jersey. David Sarnoff, then Marconi's communications manager, demonstrated the new technology to members of the New York Technology Club who were on their way to attend dedication ceremonies for new buildings at MIT. Among the distinguished group were Orville Wright and Alexander Graham Bell. That same year, thousands of amateurs listened to the DeForest Company's radio-telephone test broadcast of opera music from a phonograph in their lab at Highbridge in New York City. The company planned to continue the tests with a news format scheduled for every weekday at 8 p.m. on 800 meters. With so many hams in the audience, their request for reception reports was answered quickly as the mail poured in just before the war closing took effect. After the war, some of the first regular broadcasts came from Frank Conrad's station, 8XK in Pittsburgh, playing music. Westinghouse, his employer, began manufacturing simple receivers so that people who were not amateurs could also listen, establishing a new and different category of radio users. Several thousand Westinghouse receivers were sold in the Pittsburgh area in 1920, perhaps the first such sale specifically aimed at the general public rather than hams. Anticipating a business opportunity broader than just Pittsburgh, the company proceeded to erect broadcasting transmitters in several other cities. Conrad's station, 8XK, later became KDKA. This was the beginning of the radio broadcasting boom, which would put wireless technology into almost every home and revolutionize both commercial and amateur radio. One of the first in-depth technical treatises to cover radio-telephone for radio amateurs was delivered by engineer Walter S. Lemon at an RCA meeting in the spring of 1920 and published in QST. Describing basic amplitude modulation, AM, Lemon emphasized the necessity of using only undamped waves, since any form of damped oscillation would not be capable of faithfully reproducing the modulating audio. With spark, for example, any audio that occurred between sparks would be lost. This fact had not kept people from trying. One early method of modulation simply involved inserting a microphone in the antenna or ground lead. However, the limited current carrying capability and resultant heating of the microphone makes this scheme very wasteful of energy, and it has long since been abandoned, wrote Lemon, without mentioning the likely uncomfortable effects on the operator. With vacuum tube sets, you instead could modulate the grid or plate current by various means, basically the same ways practiced today. The plate or Heising system was preferred, in which a modulator tube's plate circuit was placed in parallel with the oscillator's tube plate circuit, both supplied with DC via a choke bypassed for RF by a capacitor. When the modulator tube conducted, it decreased the current in the oscillator tube, thus modulating the signal. Raymond A. Heising, for whom the method was named, was an engineer at the research laboratories of AT&T and Western Electric. He presented the idea himself to an amateur radio audience in another RCA to QST relay, a seminar at Columbia University in February 1921, followed by a 2-part QST article. It was yet another example of a radio pioneer, well published in professional journals, adapting his work to be understood and used by amateurs and describing it in a seminal paper. Heising explained the theory of amplitude modulation, but called it simply radiotelephony. His comprehensive treatment first warned against applying modulation techniques used in telegraphy, pointing out the fundamental distinctions that are obvious today. For example, in telegraphy, any old noise applied to the transmitted signal would suffice to make it audible in the receiver, whereas in telephony, the object was to have the receiver exactly replicate only the applied noise. He actually called it noise, meant in a generic way to mean useful sound, not a thing to be avoided. He proceeded to explain the basic mathematics, the origin of sidebands, which he called side frequencies, and the problem of overmodulation, describing its sound as tinny. Part 2 presented all the information amateurs needed to build an up-to-date radio telephone transmitter, including circuit designs and advice on which circuits and component values to choose for various kinds of vacuum tubes. In the summer of 1921, it was all there, the complete basic blueprint for sending sounds over radio. Many others would build upon this foundation for decades to come. Heising's article was just in time for, or perhaps one of the causes of, the coming explosion in radio telephony. Included in this material are quotes from the following. The Marconi Wireless Telephone, QST, August 1916, page 234. A Concert by Wireless, QST, January 1917, page 26. DeForest Wireless Telephone, QST, 1917, page 72. Clinton B. DeSoto, 200 Meters and Down, The American Radio Relay League, Incorporated, 1936, page 70. W. S. Lemon, Recent Development of Radio Telephones, QST, June 1920, page 7. R. A. Heising, Modulation in Radio Telephony, Part 1 and Part 2, QST, July 1921, page 7, and August 1921, page 9. With our thanks to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for his permission for us to use his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, in the preparation of this segment, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. Recently I received a lovely email from Michele, India Uniform 4 Tango Bravo Foxtrot, asking some pertinent questions about the Boldyak project. If you're unfamiliar, the Boldyak project aims to create a modular, bidirectional and distributed signal processing and control system that leverages GNU radio. The short answer to how I'm doing getting GNU radio to play nice with my computer is that I have bruises on my forehead from banging my head against the wall. When I get to success, I'll document it. To be clear, I'm not sure what the root cause is. I suspect it lies between the GNU radio developers, the people making packages, and the manufacturer of my computer. I'm the lucky one, stuck in the middle. A more interesting question that Michele asked was, for Boldyak, what is the AD and DA requirement for making GNU radio talk to an antenna? This is a much deeper question than meets the eye, and I think it serves as a way to discuss what I think that this project looks like. Ultimately, in the digital realm, to receive, an analog antenna signal needs to be converted to digital using an analog to digital or AD converter, and to transmit, the reverse uses a digital to analog or DA converter to make an electrical signal appear on your antenna. The specific AD or DA converter determines what you can do. The sampling rate of such a converter determines what frequencies it can handle. The sample size determines the range of signals it can handle. You can compare it with a video screen. The sample rate determines how many pixels on the screen. The sample size determines how many colors in each pixel. The sample rate of an AD converter is measured in samples per second. If the device only has one channel, you could think of this as hertz. But if there are multiple channels, like say a sound card, the sample rate is likely equally divided across each channel. You might have a sound card capable of 384,000 samples per second, or kilosamples. But if it supports simultaneous stereo audio input and output, only 96 of those 384 kilosamples will be allocated to each channel, and only half of those will actually help reconstruct the audio signal, leaving you with 48 kHz audio. In other words, the advertised frequency response might not have a direct and obvious relationship with the sample rate. At the moment, I have access to a few different AD and DA converters. The simplest one, a USB audio sound card, appears to do up to 192 kilosamples at 16 bits. The next one, an RTL SDR, tops out at a theoretical rate of 3.2 million or megasamples at 8 bits. The analog device's ADLM Pluto, or Pluto SDR, handles 61.44 megasamples at 12 bits. Now, to be clear, there are other limitations and considerations which I'm skipping over. Consider, for example, the speed at which each of these devices can talk to a computer, in this case over USB. I'm also going to ignore things like mixers, allowing devices like the RTL SDR and Pluto SDR to tune across frequency ranges that go beyond their sample rate. Each of these three devices can convert an analog antenna signal into bits that can be processed by GNU Radio. All of them can also be used to do the opposite and transmit. Yes, you heard me. Several amateurs figured out that an RTL SDR can actually transmit. Credits to ISMO, Oscar Hotel 2, Foxtrot Tango Golf, Tattoo, Oscar Hotel 2, Echo Alpha Tango, and Oscar, India Kilo 1, X-Ray Papa Victor. The point being that whatever Bold Yak looks like, it will need to handle a range of AD and DA converters. As I've said previously, I'm aiming for this to work incrementally for everyone. This means that if you have a sound card in your computer or an $8 USB one, this should work. And if you have a $33,000 National Instruments Etis USRP X410 lying around, this too should work. Also, if you have an X410 lying around not doing anything, I'd be happy to put it to use, for testing. So kidding aside, what about the rest of the Bold Yak experience? GNU Radio works with things called blocks, essentially little programs that take data, do something to it, then output it in some way. It follows the Unix philosophy: make each program do one thing well, expect the output of every program to become the input to another, design and build software to be tried early, and use tools rather than unskilled labor. Amateur radio transceivers traditionally use electronics blocks, but if we move to software, we can update and expand our capabilities as the computer we're using gets faster and the GNU radio blocks evolve. And because it's all digital, the computer doesn't actually have to be in the same box, let alone the same room. It could be in multiple boxes scattered around the internet. So the idea of Bold Yak is a collection of blocks that allow you to do radio things. You might have a separate box for each amateur radio mode: AM, FM, SSB, RTTY, CW, Whisper, FT8, FT4, Q65, but also modes like Olivia, FreeDV, SSTV, Packet, PSK31 or Thor. Instead of having to figure out how to wire these modes into your radio and your computer, the infrastructure is already there and you just download another block for a mode you want to play with. We'll need to deal with variables like which AD and DA converter is being used and what their limitations are. We'll also need to build a command and control layer and probably a few other things. I'm considering a few other aspects. For example, GNU Radio is mostly run with text files. We might distribute those using something like a web store. GNU Radio is proving hard to install. Perhaps a live CD is the way to go. We'll need to come up with a base level of functionality and the documentation to go with it. I'm still contemplating how to best license this all, specifically to stop it from being exploited. Feel free to get in touch if you have ideas. I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima Alpha Bravo.
The Young Ladies Radio League, or YLRL, has announced its Memorial Scholarship Program for 2025. Here with all the details on these scholarships is John Ross, KD8 IDJ, with this special report.
The scholarship program is aimed at female amateur radio operators studying radio, communications, electronics, or amateur radio-related arts and sciences. There are 3 Memorial Scholarship Award categories: the Ethel Smith K4LMB Memorial Scholarship, that's $2,500, the Mary Lou Brown NM7N Memorial Scholarship, $2,500, and the Martha Marty Wessel K0EPE Memorial Scholarship, $1,500. YLRL is committed to investing in women in amateur radio, and we believe that every act of volunteerism through amateur radio, even a small one, helps turn the world into a better place, said Vicki Zumwalt, N6KLS, president of YLRL. We hope that our scholarships will not only encourage students to learn more about science, technology, and engineering, but also inspire them to take pride in being an amateur radio operator and to encourage others to do so as well. The YLRL believes that education in the fields of radio, communications, electronics, and amateur radio-related arts and sciences will play an important role in shaping the world's future. Through these memorial scholarships, YLRL hopes to encourage female students to learn more about amateur radio. To qualify, students must be female, have an amateur radio license, and meet the requirements listed on the YLRL website, and apply using the online application. Applications, by the way, are due April 30th, 2025, and winners will be announced in July 2025. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The Young Ladies Radio League is an international nonprofit organization of female amateur radio enthusiasts. It was founded in 1939 and is the longest-running young ladies club in the world.
Election results have been finalized in the ARRL Iowa section. Barry Bulow, W0IY, received 283 votes, defeating incumbent Lelia Garner, WA0UIG, who received 146 votes. Bulow of Cedar Point will assume section manager duties on April 1st. Bulow is a veteran of the United States Air Force and has worked in aerospace engineering. He served on the ARRL National Convention Committee and is a past chair of the ARRL Midwestern Division Convention. Garner has served as section manager since 2019.
Coming up on our 26th year keeping the amateur radio community around the world informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio. Available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. AMSAT not only designs and builds satellites, but we also innovate. Later in 2025, the SDR Gen 2 will be built to fly on the Fox Plus and Gulf missions. This is a versatile GNU radio-based transverter. Continuous coverage from 144 MHz through 6 GHz, direct VHF, UHF, 900 MHz, L, S, and C-band operations, up conversion to 5 and dime, which is a capability to do 5 GHz and 10 GHz. It will also have all modes, CW, SSB, FT8, NB, FM, SSTV, ATV, etc. The minimum sampling downlink rate is 1 megasamples per second. The new satellites can virtually use any frequency combination and mode and be programmed by the command stations. This is the first step in designing satellites to use higher frequencies which can use much smaller antennas. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time for Haight Weekly Solar Weather and Propagation Forecast Report. A coronal mass ejection associated with a filament eruption became visible on February 26 at 1448 UTC. Model analysis determined this CME to be a miss ahead of the Sun and Earth line. Unsettled to active levels are likely on February 28 through March 1 as a coronal hole influence continues, and a glancing blow is possible from a coronal mass ejection that occurred on February 25. Solar activity is forecast to range from low to moderate levels through March 22. Minor to moderate activity is possible at different points throughout the period as active regions grow, evolve, and return from the far side of the Sun. There is a slight chance for major or greater events if any of the active regions develop additional complex magnetic structures. Geomagnetic field activity is expected to be at quiet to unsettled levels until March 6 with periodic, weak coronal hole influences. Unsettled to active levels, with isolated minor storming conditions are likely from March 7 to 18 as recurrent negative polarity coronal holes are expected to be in a geo-effective position. NOAA space weather forecasts a 55% chance of a Class M flare, and a 10% chance of a Class X flare, both within the period of February 28 to March 1. Solar activity is now increasing, but the increase is irregular, which causes, among other things, a decrease in the reliability of forecasts. Geomagnetically quiet periods, especially when associated with an increase in total solar activity, are accompanied by improved conditions for ionospheric radio wave propagation. A subsequent disturbance can cause even further improvement. The developments described can be considered as a harbinger of a March increase in solar activity. Since the spring equinox is approaching, it will contribute to an improvement in ionospheric shortwave propagation, more accurately called decameter waves. The possible shorter worse spells on March 1 and 2 and March 5 and 6 will make no difference, with the seasonal improvement not fully manifesting itself until the second half of the month. The predicted 10.7 centimeters flux for February 28 to March 6 is 195, 195, 190, 190, 190, 190, and 185, with a mean of 190.7. The predicted planetary A index for February 28 to March 6 is 12, 10, 8, 5, 5, 5, and 5, with a mean of 7.1. The predicted K index for February 28 to March 6 is 4, 3, 3, 2, 2, 2, and 2, with a mean of 2.6. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read what the numbers mean, also check out the propagation page of Karl Lewetzelschwab, K9LA, where a propagation bulletin archive is available. For customizable propagation charts, visit the VOCAP Online for Ham Radio website.
In Radio Sport this week, more grade contest. March 1st and 2nd, the ARRL International DX Contest, that's single sideband. March 2nd, the UBA Spring Contest, CW. The SARL Hamnet 40-meter set contest, that's phone. The NSARA Contest, CW phone and digital. Also on March 2nd, the WAB 3.5 megahertz phone, that of course is phone. March 3rd, the RSGB 80-meter club championship, that is digital. On March 4th, there are two contests for you. The ARS Spartan Sprint Script, CW, and the 5 AGCWYL CW Party, that is CW as well. And on March 5th, the UKEICC 80-meter contest, that is phone. Remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming Section State and Division conventions on February 28th through March 1st. It's the Birmingham Fest hosting the ARRL Alabama Section Convention. That's in Trussville, Alabama. March 7th and 8th, the Greater Houston Ham Fest hosting the ARRL Texas State Convention in Rosenberg, Texas. And on March 15th, the 69th Annual St. Patrick's Day Ham Fest hosting the ARRL West Texas Section Convention. That's in Midland, Texas. And also don't forget to search the ARRL Ham Fest and Convention database to find your events in your area.
The Fram to Ham ISS simulation event was a success, bringing together amateur radio enthusiasts and educators from around the world. Over 5 days, participants engaged in simulated transmissions from the ISS service module radio to mirror real-world communications aboard a Dragon spacecraft, which will be used for the upcoming Fram 2 mission. This provided valuable practice for the Fram to Ham competition. The event was organized and run by ARIS. The ham radio community followed a request to withhold image postings until the official reveal date of February 20th. By the end of the event, 1,975 images had been submitted, with nearly half coming from students and educators, highlighting the educational impact of the initiative. The Fram 2 mission will be the first human spaceflight in polar orbit, flying over the North and South Poles. Named after the polar exploration ship Fram, the mission aims to highlight exploration, curiosity, and technological progress. A SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket will launch 4 astronauts from Europe and Australia into orbit for 3 to 5 days, with a targeted launch in spring 2025. The crew consists of Mission Commander Chung Wang of Malta, Vehicle Commander Jannicke Mikkelsen of Norway, pilot Rabea Roga of Germany, and mission specialist Eric Phillips of Australia. As part of the mission, Rabea Roga, LB9NJ, and KD3AID will operate the onboard amateur radio system, transmitting SSTV images for a high school and university student competition. These images will also be available to the general public. The Fram to Ham competition is an experimental radio challenge open to high school and university students, where teams receive SSTV images of 3 geographical locations transmitted via the onboard ham radio. However, these images will be fragmented and scrambled, requiring participants to piece them together and determine their significance in polar history. While anyone can receive the images, forming an international team may help solve the puzzle. Participants must correctly identify at least 2 of the 3 locations to qualify for prizes, which include QSL cards with space-flown Fram2 mission stickers. The competition is open to members of educational institutions between the ages of 16 to 25 years from eligible countries, including the European SEPT countries, the US, Canada, and Australia. The ARIS International team has supported the event by organizing the Fram to Ham ISS simulation to help participants develop skills in acquiring images for the competition. For more information, visit the Fram to Ham website at fram2ham.com.
Every July, QST, the membership journal of the ARRL, publishes a special issue with an MCOM focus. This issue is a perfect opportunity for your Aries group to share your experiences doing exercises and drills, as well as participating in responses, so other groups will benefit from your experience. Here's what QST is looking for. 1,200 to 1,800 words. Tell the story of your participation in an exercise or response with the how-to angle. For example, if your club designed an exercise, talk about the rationale that led to the choice of the exercise scenario and parameters. 2 to 5 high-resolution images include captions that explains what is happening in the photos, the names and call signs of any hams pictured, and the name and call sign, if applicable, of the person who took each photo. Send the manuscript and photos to QST at ARRL.org by May 1st, 2025.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Scientists are developing solar cell satellites as a potential early warning system for geomagnetic storms, which can disrupt technological systems on Earth. These sails, which harness sunlight for propulsion, could enhance space travel and improve forecasting for space weather events. Solar sailing operates similarly to traditional sailing, except it uses photons from the sun instead of wind. A lot of us have experienced sailing. It's exactly like that, said Irfam Azim, Division Chief at NOAA's Office of Space Weather Observations. Instead of using air, we're using the light emitted by the sun to propel our satellites. Unlike traditional propulsion systems, solar sails offer a cost-effective means of maneuvering satellites without fuel. This is a very novel technology, Azim added. We have traditionally relied on propulsion to take satellites from one place to another, and solar sails are providing a new, efficient way to travel in space. NOAA's satellites play a vital role in space weather monitoring, gathering data that helps issue warnings for potentially disruptive solar flares. Currently, satellites like NASA's Advanced Composition Explorer and NOAA's Deep Space Climate Observatory track the solar wind, a stream of charged particles from the sun that can interact with Earth's magnetic field. Although current monitoring provides some advance notice of geomagnetic storms, scientists aim to improve lead time by positioning satellites closer to the sun through NOAA's Space Weather Next program. One major advantage of solar sails is their ability to travel beyond the Lagrange 1 point, or L1, a location about 932,000 miles from Earth where satellites currently observe the sun. L1 provides a semi-stable orbit for persistent sun monitoring, Azim explained. But if you want to go further, you need chemical rockets. Solar sails offer a cost-effective alternative for moving upstream. By positioning satellites further ahead in the solar wind, NOAA estimates they could improve geomagnetic storm lead times by 50%. At the American Meteorological Society's annual meeting, NOAA provided updates on the Solar Cruiser project, a collaboration with NASA. The full-scale solar sail, set to span 17,793 square feet, is under construction. The spacecraft will include 4 sails, each built separately with completion expected by February 2026. NOAA aims to secure a rideshare launch by 2029. I'm most excited about the complexity of integrating different disciplines, Azim said. Advances in material science and other fields are helping us push space weather monitoring to the next level.
We're seeing peak conditions from Solar Cycle 25 just in time for the ARRL International DX Single Sideband Contest. Here with all the details on this popular contest is John Ross, KD8IDJ, who files this report from League Headquarters.
Gets underway this weekend at 0000 UTC on Saturday, March 1st, and concludes at 2359 UTC on Sunday, March 2nd. ARRL Contest Program Manager Paul Bork, N1SFE, is gearing up to operate as part of a multi-operator single transmitter station for the event, and he is eager to get started. This is a great contest to work some new DX and to add to your DXCC totals, as DX stations will be pointing their antennas towards the U.S. and Canada this weekend, he said. The contest is an exercise in endurance, but also a great primer on DX propagation. Earlier in the month, the CW portion of the contest garnered at least 4,830 log submissions. The nature of the contest means the whole world is trying to work North America. Even modest stations can experience the thrill of working some new countries, said Bork. Just get on the air. So if it's a full weekend of contesting that sounds too overwhelming, ARRL encourages radio amateurs to set a small goal, perhaps 100 contacts to get started. Get into the groove of it and then start stretching that goal. Maybe you'll wind up at 100 multipliers instead. Since each of those multipliers is a DX entity, those 100 would qualify the operator for an ARRL DXCC award. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
With band conditions expected to be good and activity expected to reflect that excitement, Borquet hopes to receive even more log submissions. The more, the merrier. He really hopes hams will take advantage of this prime operating opportunity. For complete rules and more information, visit arrl.org/ARRL-DX.
An unlikely source of RFI that was compromising signals received by a radio telescope in Western Australia has been identified as an airplane deflecting broadcast signals. Realizing that the ever-growing presence of orbiting satellites may pose the same hazard, causing astronomers' data to become contaminated, scientists have devised what they hope is a solution. The stray signals that were interfering with the sensitive telescopes in the Murchison Wide Field Array were even more puzzling because the array is in an area designated by the government as a radio quiet zone. Stranger still, the signal turned out to be a broadcast signal from Australian TV and appeared to move across the sky. Researchers at Brown University in the United States, who are involved with the Murchison project, determined that an airplane had been deflecting the signal and had likely been doing so for nearly 5 years. This form of signal deflection, of course, held implications for other objects in the sky, most prominently satellites, whose numbers are growing each year. With this in mind, researchers at the university devised a method of filtering the RFI via a new method that combined 2 existing technologies already in use, near-field corrections and beamforming. The former allows the radio telescope to adjust to closer objects more accurately instead of strictly peering into deep space. The latter adds to the sharpened focus through the use of a beam, just as its name suggests. Using this combination, scientists confirmed that the RFI had been deflected off an airplane moving at 492 miles per hour and had originally been transmitted by Channel 7 on Australian digital TV.
2 hams who will be on the air in Alabama in March aren't just activating a POTA site, but reminding the world of one of the most painful moments in the history of civil rights in the United States. The challenging road to defending their constitutional right to vote led hundreds of black civil rights marchers onto another road, one that led them outside Selma, Alabama, on March 7, 1965. There, as they arrived at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, bound for the governor's office in Montgomery, the marchers were assaulted by state and local police and forced back into Selma. That violent day came to be known as Bloody Sunday. This protest was also an outcry over the killing of civil rights protester Jimmy Lee Jackson, who was beaten and shot during a march for voting rights 1 month earlier. Bloody Sunday marked the first of 3 historic marches that led to the Voting Rights Act of 1965 later that year. Its story is told along the 54-mile route now known as the Selma to Montgomery National Historic Trail. 60 years later, amateur radio operators are marking the anniversary of Bloody Sunday by calling QRZ on the weekend of March 8th and 9th to call attention to that long, painful period in U.S. history. This is a POTA activation. The trail is designated by Parks on the Air as US-4580. Listen for Tom, KB5FHK, and Sloan, N3UPS, who will be operating SSB on HF and linear transponder satellites. The operators will begin on 40 meters around 0100 UTC on that Saturday. They will return on Sunday after 1300 UTC to operate on 10, 15, and 20 meters, as well as via linear transponder satellites. Sloan and Tom will be sending commemorative QSL cards featuring an image of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, a symbol of turbulence and struggle, and ultimately of change.
The doors of the International DX Convention in Visalia, California are opening extra wide at the Visalia Conference Center, where young visitors up to the age of 18 are being given entrance for free. Youngsters will get access at no cost to the convention's forums and programs as well as the exhibit hall. The 76th annual convention is sponsored by the Northern California DX Club and will be held from April 11th through the 13th. The free registration does not include meals, the bus tour, or any raffle tickets. The deadline for anyone to pre-register online is April 3rd. Paying guests who are planning to attend but do not register in advance can expect a 10% increase in the admission fee. For more details, please go to dxconvention.com.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
A sweeping executive order signed by President Donald Trump this week places the FCC, along with other independent government agencies, under the increased supervision of the White House. The FCC and other agencies were previously not under direct White House control. Under the new order, all independent federal agencies and executive branches must submit draft regulations to be reviewed by the White House. The federal agencies will also have their performance standards and budget allotments reviewed by the White House. Further, the independent agencies, which also include the Federal Trade Commission and Securities and Exchange Commission, must appoint White House liaisons and regularly consult with and coordinate policies and priorities with the White House. The executive order lays out Trump's argument for the change, saying previous administrations have allowed so-called independent regulatory agencies to operate with minimal presidential supervision. These regulatory agencies currently exercise substantial executive authority without sufficient accountability to the president, and through him to the American people, the order says. Moreover, these regulatory agencies have been permitted to promulgate significant regulations without review by the president. For the federal government to be truly accountable to the American people, officials who wield vast executive power must be supervised and controlled by the people's elected president. The executive order says the Office of Management and Budget will now have supervising authority over the agencies. The OMB will also be able to adjust independent agencies' apportionments to ensure that U.S. tax dollars are spent wisely. The FCC, now under the leadership of Republican Chairman Brendan Carr, did not immediately respond to requests seeking comment on the latest development. The National Association of Broadcasters, up to this point, has mostly applauded the regulatory approach of the new FCC under Trump, including the appointment of Carr as chairman and the nomination of Olivia Trusty to fill an open seat at the commission.
Registration begins mid-March for the 24th USA National Radio Orienteering Championships. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is here with more.
This year's event takes place on June 18th through the 22nd in the Wahari Mountains of North Carolina and will be hosted by the Backwoods Orienteering Club, BOK, at Morrow Mountain State Park. Radio orienteers from across the country, plus visitors from abroad, are expected to attend. The On-Foot Transmitter Hunting Championships begin Wednesday, June 18th, with model events on 2 meters and 80 meters. Thursday morning is the sprint. Friday is foxering, a mix of fox hunting and orienteering. And Saturday is a 2-meter classic, and Sunday is the 80-meter classic. U.S. ARDF championships are open to anyone of any age who can safely navigate in the woods with a handheld gear for several kilometers. An amateur radio license is not a requirement. The name radio orienteering has been around for a very long time and has frequently been applied to the sport of amateur radio direction finding, ADRF. But it hasn't been recognized in any official sense. However, because the radio orienteering is more descriptive of the sport, especially to the orienteering community, and because amateur radio direction finding is often confused with the other direction finding activities like mobile T hunting, the ARRL-ARDF committee has decided to officially favor the use of the term radio orienteering, even renaming itself as the ARRL Radio Orienteering Committee. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Medals are awarded for each event in each of the International Amateur Radio Union age and gender category. Winners of these championships will be under consideration for membership in the ARDF Team USA, which will travel to future international competitions. The name radio orienteering has been around for a very long time and has frequently been applied to the sport of amateur radio direction finding. It hasn't been recognized in any official sense, but because radio orienteering is more descriptive of the sport, especially the orienteering community, and because amateur radio direction finding is often confused with other radio direction finding activities, like mobile T hunting, the ARRL-ARDF committee has decided to officially favor the use of the term radio orienteering, even renaming itself as the ARRL Radio Orienteering Committee.
Firefly Aerospace's Blue Ghost lunar lander has successfully lowered its orbit, bringing it closer to the moon's surface as it prepares for a historic landing attempt. The spacecraft, part of Firefly's Ghost Riders in the Sky mission, completed a 3-minute, 18-second engine burn that reduced its altitude to 120 kilometers above the lunar surface. This maneuver marks a critical phase of the mission as the lander remains in this orbit until its descent begins in less than 2 weeks. In a recent update on X, Firefly Aerospace shared a video showcasing Blue Ghost's new perspective of the lunar surface. The company also warned of intermittent communications blackouts as the lander orbits around the moon's far side, while on the near side, mission teams are receiving data and refining plans for additional engine burns that will bring Blue Ghost even closer to its intended landing site. The mission is on track for a touchdown on March 2nd. Blue Ghost was launched last month aboard a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. It is part of NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services program, which contracts private companies to deliver scientific instruments and technology demonstrations to the moon. The lander is carrying 10 NASA payloads designed to study the lunar environment and aid future Artemis program missions. Sharing its launch aboard the Falcon 9 was another lunar lander, Japan-based iSpace's Resilience. This marks iSpace's second attempt at a moon landing after its first mission ended in failure. Resilience is carrying a micro-rover named Tenacious and follows a different trajectory than Blue Ghost, taking a longer, more energy-efficient route. Unlike Blue Ghost, which will attempt a landing within weeks, Resilience's descent is planned for late May or early June. Resilience recently performed a lunar flyby on February 14th, passing within 8,400 kilometers of the moon's surface. The maneuver provided a gravity assist that adjusted its trajectory for a smoother arrival into lunar orbit in early May. The lander captured and transmitted a striking image of the lunar surface from 14,439 kilometers away, marking a milestone for Japan's private space industry. If successful, Blue Ghost will become the second private spacecraft to land on the moon. The lander is set to operate for one full lunar day, equivalent to about 2 weeks, before losing power as the sun sets. During that time, its NASA payloads will conduct experiments, collect samples, and test new technology. These efforts will contribute to ongoing lunar exploration and preparations for the Artemis program's future crewed missions to the moon.
ARRL is equipping the next generation of radio amateurs with the knowledge to get active on the air. Here to tell us what On the Air Live is all about, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, with this report.
On the Air Live is a monthly interactive webinar series that does deep dives into topics aimed at the new and intermediate ham. It complements material found in On Air magazine. February's event had nearly 130 people in attendance. The events are hosted by ARRL Education Specialist Wayne Green, KB4SDF. OTA Live has seen rapid growth and good engagement in the 2 months it's been going. The most recent On the Air Live covered programming a handheld radio, and we got a lot of good questions, said Green. Being an interactive webinar, we have the opportunity to spend time discussing things on which members need more information. On the Air Live is accessed through the ARRL Learning Center at learn.arrl.org. It is a benefit of ARRL membership, and members must be logged into the website to access it for the live or archived sessions. The next On the Air Live is Tuesday, March 25th, 2025 at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It will focus on advanced functions of handheld radios, including getting them on digital modes. We're going to take the handheld radio and expand its capability by attaching it to a sound card, said Green. Those who attend will learn how to use APRS and VARA, including WinLink. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
We had a great time with members on the last one, and I hope more people will join us in March, said Green.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, your amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air, available as a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartMedia, and Spotify.
The David Sarnoff Radio Club in Princeton, New Jersey will operate special event station November 3 Papa on Pi Day, March 14th, 2025. The event celebrates the March 14th, 1879 birthday of Princeton's most famous resident, physicist Albert Einstein, best known for his equation E=mc², which states that energy and mass are the same thing in different forms. Why call it Pi Day? If you take the distance around a circle, the circumference, and divide it by the distance across the circle, its diameter, you always get the number 3.14, the value known as pi, which also happens to be the date of Einstein's birthday. November 3 Papa will be using CW and single sideband, two modes in existence during Einstein's lifetime. 14.031 CW, 14.314 upper sideband, 7.031 CW, and 7.227 MHz lower sideband from 2 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, or 1300 to 1900 UTC. The DSRC will also be monitoring the club's repeater, 146.46 MHz, for local contacts. To receive a special event QSL card, send a self-addressed stamped envelope along with your QSO information, call sign, state abbreviation, band, UTC time of contact to Bob Urich, WA2BSP, 104 Knoll Way, Rocky Hill, New Jersey, 08553.
The concept of spectrum sharing is nothing new for radio amateurs, but now in the UK, the regulator is proposing that, for the first time, spectrum sharing should be done between two different technologies. With traffic increasing in the United Kingdom for the usage of both Wi-Fi and mobile services, Ofcom is exploring ways for both technologies to share the upper part of the 6 GHz band, frequencies between 6.425 and 7.125 GHz. The regulator is hoping that its implementation will benefit mobile networks, especially in crowded areas, and at the same time provide support for advanced Wi-Fi services. The proposed sharing would require both services to explore ways of integrating shared usage, perhaps by developing a sensing capability in which one could detect the other's presence on a frequency. In a statement, Ofcom said the change would provide a basis for the future, eventually supporting virtual and augmented reality as well as artificial intelligence. Meanwhile, Ofcom said that it hopes to see the lower part of the 6 GHz band, frequencies between 5.925 and 6.425, used for higher power Wi-Fi outdoors whose frequencies are at present only allocated for low power indoor use.
It is time for this week's AMSAT satellite shorts from all over, and we begin this week with an announcement from NASA. In 2024, NASA's search and rescue technologies contributed to saving 407 lives in the U.S., including 314 at sea, 41 in aviation incidents, and 52 through personal locator beacons. These efforts are part of the international COSPAS-SARSAT satellite-aided search and rescue system, which has helped save over 50,000 lives worldwide since 1982. Using GPS satellites, emergency beacons transmit distress signals to the COSPAS-SARSAT network, enabling first responders to locate and rescue those in need. NASA's Search and Rescue Office, a division of the SCAN program, has been involved in rescue operations since 1979 and continues to enhance beacon technology for both Earth-based and space missions. The Advanced Next Generation Emergency Locator Beacon is being developed to support crew recovery efforts, including for Artemis missions returning from deep space. NASA collaborates with NOAA, the U.S. Coast Guard, the U.S. Air Force, and other agencies to ensure rapid response and rescue operations across land, sea, and air. Next, NASA and SpaceX have decided to swap Crew Dragon spacecraft for the Crew 10 mission, opting to use the previously flown Endurance instead of a newly built capsule to prevent further delays. Endurance, which had been assigned to the private AX-4 mission, will now support Crew 10, allowing the launch to be accelerated from late March to no earlier than March 12th. The original delay stemmed from setbacks in assembling and testing the new Crew Dragon, pushing the Crew 10 launch from February to March. Crew 9, currently on the ISS, will return a few days after Crew 10 arrives, bringing back NASA astronauts Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore, whose extended stay became a political topic after Elon Musk and President Trump criticized the delay. Williams, however, dismissed claims that she and Wilmore were abandoned, stating that they were safe and had all necessary resources aboard the station. The change in spacecraft does not alter the Crew 10 lineup commanded by NASA astronaut Ann McClain, but it raises uncertainty about the AX-4 mission timeline, which was originally planned for April. And finally, SpaceX is preparing for its 8th Starship launch, IFT-8, by conducting crucial static fire tests at its Starbase facility in Texas. The company recently ignited all 33 Raptor engines on the Super Heavy booster and completed a dynamic engine test for the Starship stage to simulate various in-flight conditions. These tests mark a key milestone before the vehicle's final stacking, where the two massive components will be joined for launch. Once stacked, the fully integrated Starship and Super Heavy system will stand at an impressive 403 feet tall, making it the most powerful rocket ever built. Starship's previous test flight, IFT-7, had mixed results, with a successful booster catch but a loss of communication with the Starship stage, which ultimately disintegrated over the Caribbean. SpaceX continues to refine the vehicle with each iteration, incorporating new hardware to improve performance and reliability. While IFT-8 could launch by the end of February, the schedule remains dependent on FAA approval and final preparations.
Earlier this month, the Federal Communications Commission issued an enforcement advisory warning radio broadcasters not to engage in payola practices in connection with having musical artists perform at radio station events or festivals. As the FCC explained, payola is the unreported payment to or acceptance by employees of broadcast stations, program producers, or program suppliers of any money, service, or valuable consideration to achieve airplay for any programming. If a payment has been made in exchange for airplay, the broadcaster is required to disclose that during the broadcast. In its enforcement advisory, the FCC expressed a concern about the manipulation of radio airplay by a broadcaster based on a musical artist's agreement to participate in a broadcast station's promotion or event. often without receiving payment for the appearance. The FCC warned broadcast stations that host promotions or events that include artists, whether or not the artists are compensated for the appearance, must take appropriate steps to ensure that all promotions or events comply with the Payola requirements and general public interest components of the Act and the FCC's rules, and avoid agreements that covertly increase the amount of airplay based on an artist's performance or appearance at a station's promotion or event.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
AMSAT EA has confirmed that the FM repeater aboard the Haight satellite has been successfully activated and is now available for amateur radio operators worldwide. The activation took place on February 19, 2025, following a series of telemetry and command tests to ensure the satellite's stability and performance. Early reports indicate that the repeater is functioning as expected, providing strong two-way FM voice communications. AMSAT EA expressed its gratitude to the amateur radio community for submitting telemetry reports, which contributed to the successful commissioning of the satellite. Haight-R was launched aboard a Falcon 9 rocket from Vandenberg Space Force Base in California on January 14, 2025, as part of SpaceX's Transporter 12 mission. Developed by AMSAT EA, the satellite carries an FM and digital repeater payload designed to provide communication services to amateur radio enthusiasts worldwide. It was deployed from the D-Orbit Ion SCV-016 orbital transfer vehicle on January 22nd and has since been transmitting telemetry data while undergoing operational testing. With the repeater now active, operators can use the uplink frequency of 145.925 MHz and the download frequency of 436.885 MHz for communication, with additional support for digital modes such as APRS and FSK telemetry at various data rates. At the request of AMSAT EA, AMSAT has officially designated Haight-R as Spain Oscar 124, or SO-124, in recognition of its contributions to amateur satellite communications. This designation underscores the satellite's role in expanding access to space-based communications for the amateur radio community. AMSAT congratulates AMSAT EA on this achievement and looks forward to the continued success of this and future projects. Meanwhile, amateur radio operators eagerly anticipate the upcoming launch of Haight-R's ICM on the Transporter 13 mission in March 2025, which will further enhance satellite-based communication capabilities.
India's first 24-hour ham radio learning marathon, Ether Night, held in West Bengal, saw the participation of 155 enthusiasts who designed and built antennas for communicating with amateur radio networks across the world. Held on February 22nd and 23rd at the Uttapara, the marathon session aimed at expanding the footprint of the amateur radio community. The event featured a series of hands-on sessions, live demonstrations, and expert-led workshops covering crucial topics such as antenna analysis, field operations, digital modes, emergency communications, and signal optimization. The organizers, Oscar India, said in a statement,
What amateur radio operating strategy combines a little bit of being mobile, a little bit of fixed, and, if you so choose, a little bit of maritime? It's spelled RADAR, which is the acronym for Rapid Deployment Amateur Radio. Eddie Leeton, ZS6BNE, pioneered the operating concept more than a decade ago in South Africa with an event known as the Radar Challenge, which was embraced worldwide by portable operators. This year, the Radar Rally, which takes place on April 5th, keeps the spirit and the strategy of the original challenge. The 4-hour rally is particularly appealing to hams who are accustomed to working portable outdoors, and this is an activity that can be combined with summits on the air and parks on the air. Operators spend 4 hours setting up a station as quickly as possible, making 5 contacts, then dismantling the station and moving to another location to do the same thing again. According to the rules, the required distances vary depending on whether the radio operator is walking, cycling, driving, or even canoeing. All bands and modes are acceptable, but use of terrestrial repeaters is not. For more information, go to radarrally.info on the web.
And our final story this week. If you use solar panels in your portable operation or are thinking about it, this development in solar power technology on a much larger scale may be of interest to you. Harnessing the sun's power doesn't come easily or affordably, but researchers at the University of Tokyo believe they're working on a future for solar panels that will be cheaper and more efficient. They announced recently that they have combined titanium dioxide with selenium, a production process that could bring down the heavy costs of extracting titanium from its ore so it can be used in a variety of energy-related products, including solar panels. The scientists' method relies on introducing an element known as yttrium into the process of purifying the titanium. So far, they have been impressed with the resulting performance. According to recent reports on MSN.com, the only drawback is that the element leaves traces of itself behind in the final result, enough of a contaminant that it could compromise its durability and its resistance to corrosion. The next challenge? Minimize what is left behind so that a new type of solar cell will be available in the future with a higher level of energy efficiency and affordability.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon. This Week in Amateur Radio is heard on nets and repeater systems all around the U.S. and around the world on great operations like WA0RCR from the center of the U.S., Wentzville, Missouri, where This Week in Amateur Radio is proud to be part of the legendary Gateway 160-meter net report each weekend. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.